And it's a big g'day to everybody down there at Heywood. It's Graeme Anderson here from Agriculture Victoria with a bit of an update on all things climate. So I lead our Agriculture Victoria seasonal risk team. We put out regular newsletters. The break newsletter comes out monthly on commentary on seasonal outlooks. There's also the deep soil moisture probe underneath crops, and also pasture paddocks as well to tell us how much moisture stored underneath our paddocks. We do a lot of forums and climate webinars. So I'm going to run through just some of the tools that are useful for farming. Here's one great tool. It's the Managing Climate Variability app, and you can have it on your desktop or as an app. Basically, I've got the Heywood long-term data. Each one of these dots is a long-term rainfall record, and I've just got the Heywood post office, and you can do, well, how are we tracking so far this year? All of these are previous years, these lines, individual lines. The blue is the long-term average, and the red is just what's been happening since January. I've just gone back a bit longer here. This is going back to January last year, and you can see that's the long-term average. And it got a bit of a slow start last year, but when things kicked off, went all right, but it was a fraction slower, and then you're off again and running. But it's a really good tool to keep track of progress of rainfall for the season. Also, another really useful tool, it's got a how often. So this goes back, and you say, okay, well, how often, and the query, you can enter in whatever you want, but say how often might we get 50 mil or 2 inches in the old scale over a 14-day period in that particular record in the months of between 1st of March and end of April. So how often has that happened in the past in that Heywood record? And it'll tell you that it happens about 50% of the time. So you can also see, how often it's happened in the past, and so it's a really good tool to just look back and understand your history, because that's all part of making sense of where we're at now. Just looking at rainfall for last year, you can see this is rainfall decile. So this is where it was, decile 10, wettest 10% of years. Decile 1 is where it was the driest 10% of years, and this was driest on record. So we did pretty well to be in decile 2, 3 down southwest Vic last year, and there was some average. But also you can see large areas of Australia had their driest year on record. So so it was pretty good, and we'll talk about why we dodged a bullet last year thanks to some of that good old frontal activity. So here's a long-term rainfall record for Heywood, goes all the way back to 1887. This is millimetres up the side, so 400, 600, 800, 1000 mil. And there's a line here which is just through the long-term average, which is about 815 millimetres. So you can see a lot of variability in the past. You can see the sort of Federation drought there. And sort of World War I, drought. But also you can sort of see in that last 20 years, you've had 5 wetter, about 15 drier. So we'll talk a little bit about what might be going on there. Still got plenty of rainfall, still pretty reliable rainfall really, but we'll talk about what drives variability and also why this change is happening. This is that same record, but just looking at the summer, autumn, winter and spring. A lot of variability in the mix there. You can see most of the rainfall's in winter, strongly winter dominated. And I guess when you look at anything that's a bit different from good old-fashioned variability, there's probably a few drier springs in the mix there. But also autumn, certainly wetter autumns have been rarer in the last 20 years. Now there's a bunch of rainfall tools that I've got. I won't go through them all on this recording, but Michelle might take you through them. Just Google climate dogs. The first tweet I've got there has a list of different tools that you can run through and pick out the ones that you think are useful for you. This is mainly around tools around the 7-day forecast. One thing I'd like to say though is the key thing with forecast, especially for weather, is that there is no one perfect forecast. There's lots of great models around the world. This is the Bureau's model, this is the US model, this is the European model. An example from a weather event in 2018, you can see that while they all sort of predict the rain event, there's variations between them, and so that'll often happen with your forecast. So it's important to know sometimes with weather events, not only is what your model doing and where your forecast is getting that model from, but also is there much variation between models. And here's an example of where you've got a range of different models, and depending on which one you're using, you could be expecting anywhere from 1.9 to to 17 mil. So one thing with phone apps and everything else, just important to know which weather model your app is drawing it from, because it's there's a fair chance it may not be coming from the Bureau, which is okay, but it's just important to do your homework, know whose forecast you're listening to, and sometimes for weather events, knowing what the range is too can be as useful as knowing how much they're predicting. Here's a few tools here. The 7-day forecast viewer. I like to look at that to see how the Australian Bureau's forecast model thinks things are going to play out. This one's a pretty good rainfall outlook. You can just get the 8-day outlook, and it combines 6 different global models and puts them all together in the one map. Pretty useful. So talking about what's behind wetter and dry years, well, all our rain starts off as moisture. We've got to have moisture in the air, and so the key driver of moisture is, the wettest part of the planet's around the tropics and the warmest part along the equator, and this is precipitable water, which is moisture in the air. And you can see forecasters really look at this area to see, well, when is there more moisture around the Australian region as opposed to when it's in other parts of the world. So that's a really important feed. It feeds into our weather patterns, and down here in southwest Victoria, wetter years are when there's a good feed of moisture, and we've got regular sort of frontal activity, which helps make that moisture fall out. So here we are again, map of Australia. Key drivers of our wetter and dry years, they're Pacific Ocean, El Nino, Southern Oscillation. Some years it's in a helpful mood, sending a small moisture, and other years in El Nino years, the trade winds go backwards and all the moisture's out the other side of the ocean. The same with the Indian Ocean dipole. Sometimes it's in a helpful mood, feeds in heaps of moisture, like in 2016, and other years all that moisture's over on the African side. So these two are really important to watch for seasonal forecasts. And we're very lucky that the frontal activity and a key part of our reliable rainfall down south is to do with this southern annular mode, which drives all of the cold fronts that flick their tails across here. There's a subtropical ridge, which is where the high pressure pattern likes to sit, and these two will probably be behaving a bit differently in recent years, which is probably around that autumn, or perhaps a bit less reliable autumns. And just looking at last year, we had the IOD in its drier phase. The ENSO was not quite El Nino, but it was not sending much moisture. But the southern annular mode, it was in having what was called quite a strong negative phase, which means that you got lots of regular frontal activity. So that really saved our bacon last year down in southwest Victoria and West Gippsland, and anywhere in the rain shadow of those sort of westerlies, had really dry years. So thanks for Sam last year. That saved us. Now there's a lot of work going into developing new seasonal forecast products to help make sure there's stuff there that's useful for farmers. And here's just an example. This is from last year. It's July 25th forecast in 2019. This is the typical sort of forecast that you might see for the 3-month outlook, and the Bureau has percentage chance of above median rainfall. And you can see a map there where talking about a 35% chance of above median, which means there's an increased chance of drier. But it's important when you look at the model runs behind these sort of forecasts that there's a lot more going on. So if you imagine that they've run the model 100 times for somewhere like Bendigo for the next 3 months, so 35 of the models were wetter for Bendigo and 65 were drier. But if you look at the individual details of that forecast, you can see in terms of decile 1, 2, 33 of the model runs landed in decile 1, 2, but it didn't mean it couldn't be wet. There were still 8 models landed in decile 9, 10. So it's just important to know that no one actually knows what's going to happen in the future with these forecasts, but so that they can never be emphatic, but just sometimes they're sort of saying there's increased chance of being at one end or the other. But that's an important thing to consider, and really you've got to map out your scenarios no matter what happens. And this just means that 8 of the models picked up some particular weather event that it thought might have come through. This is the current 3-month outlook. You can see from the Bureau there's a few more colours there which hints on the wetter side of average, but I've just got an example here. So down, say, for Mount Gambier with the current 3-month outlook, you can see here that above median, it's saying it's got a 65 to 70% chance of above median for the next 3 months. But also, if you look at the details of those model runs, that's sort of how they're split. That there's 31 of the 100 models have landed in decile 9, 10, but there's still a few in the drier. So certainly good to see it pointing in that wetter direction, but it doesn't discount there's still like a 25% chance of being decile 1 to 4. If you look at a 50-50 forecast, like say down in East Gippsland, you can sort of see there's a spread right across. So anything can still happen with a 50-50 forecast. Now the break newsletter, and you'll see this in the Milking the Weather too. This is a great little summary. It's probably the quickest way to look at all of this stuff. Dale Gray looks at 12 global forecast models from across the planet and puts them all in the one table. He looks at the little map of Victoria and all of them, and then says how many are sitting on drier or wetter or about average. So this is the current outlook for the next 3 months. They're all sitting there. If we looked at this last August, all of them were sitting on the dry side of the fence. So some years, and it's not every year, but some years the models get a lot more confident about either being on the wetter side or the dry side. And some years, they're all spread out, which doesn't give you much to go on. So that's good old-fashioned variability. Is there anything different from what's happened in the past? So this is temperature maps for the last 100 years. The blue is cooler than average years. The yellow and orange is warmer than average years. And you can see that we've had a lot of variability in our past. But I guess one thing that is being measured is an increasing warming trend. So while we've got rainfall variability that will continue, a key signature is this sort of warming trend that's happening. Now, I know there's benefits that can come with that in southwest Victoria because milder winters can grow a bit more grass, but there's also some challenges looming because this is a trend that's going to continue. So here's temperatures for Southeast Australia, maximum temperatures, summer, autumn, winter and spring. Like I said, milder winters can be helpful from pasture down southwest, but you'll notice out of the last 10 springs, there's been quite a few between 1, 2 and almost 3 degrees warmer. So that's basically an extra month or summer arriving a month earlier. So we'll still have rainfall variability, but this warming trend is something that we'll be experiencing a bit more often. And just occasionally, if we have a drier spring and a dry summer, it just means we've got a bigger summer season to try and manage. Some summers will be fine because we'll have plenty of moisture, but some of the drier seasons could be a bit more extended. Also, the other thing that's a bit different, if you look at this region across southern Australia, this is the pressure pattern in this region, and you can see, well, it varies from year to year since 1950, and it's usually stronger pressure pattern in El Nino years, but you can see this broader trend there, and that's expected. It's to do with as the planet's got a bit warmer, this subtropical ridge has got a bit stronger, and they expect that to continue as well, and that's what they're blaming for why autumns are perhaps a bit less reliable, just the odd weather event being squeezed further south. So just that was a quick summary, weather forecasts, seasonal outlooks and climate change projections. We've just covered them all there pretty quick. If I was giving a star for any of them, the highest confidence around the weather forecasts, of course, and day one's better than day 8, but beware curveballs such as thunderstorms. Also seasonal forecasts, sometimes they don't tell us much, but some seasons they do, and it's especially when there's a major climate phase underway, so that's part of understanding the commentary. And the other thing is around the climate change, there's actually strong confidence in increased heat and that poleward shift. If you warm up the planet, the tropics expands either side of the equator and it pushes all of the storm tracks and weather patterns towards the poles. So for us, that just means that some of that frontal activity and storm traps just shifts a bit further south. So and there's actually more confidence in that than there is about the weather prediction for 12 days time. So that's all in the mix. There's some useful info. There's a 4-page fact sheet on the Bureau's just put out on the last 30 years in Glenelg Hopkins region, so it's really worth getting them. Some good data that's there on temperatures, rainfall and frosts and things like that. I'll finish up basically saying, no matter what happens with forecasts, this is all the stuff that holds agriculture in good stead to deal with increasing variability in seasons. We've got lots of modern tech R&D and genetics to apply on farms, which is helping us improve on-farm and regional infrastructure, certainly around storage of water and fodder to deal with sometimes with those biggest summers. Also important, we're still trying to adapt and meet what markets want and maintaining our biosecurity amidst increasing need for fodder and that in some seasons. Business management for variable years and income is really critical, as to is the farm planning, and make sure that, especially when we knock into either really wet seasons or really dry seasons, that we're not knocking our soils and things around. So that's been a lot of great work done there. And the key bit, which is what you talk about today, getting together, learning off one another, and making sure you surround yourself with some good knowledge channels so you can get on with the job of farming. Anyway, I hope that's useful. There's a few links to find out more. If you want to subscribe to the break, it's free. There's also some other climate tools there if you want. Anyway, all the best with your workshop.